Happy Monday. This is Miss Fitzgerald here to read you our text, The Honeymakers. So think about the title for a second and also think about the picture. And let's make a guess as to what you think this book may be about. I'm sure some of you guys have some good guesses. It is springtime. 2 beekeepers have placed a beehive on a hill. I'm wondering why they chose a hill to place the beehive on. Activity begins around the hive. The honeybees and the beekeepers are the honeymakers. Honeybees travel to and from the hive. Their earliest ancestors lived about 80 million years ago. The scientific name for honeybee comes from the Latin word apis mellifera, meaning honey bearer. Honeybees are social creatures. They form highly structured groups called colonies. In a colony, as many as 50,000 or more bees live together and work at their own special jobs. And try to think, what might some jobs be that the bees have in their colony? What might they need to do? Many honeybees like to make their homes in dark, enclosed places. Often a colony of wild honeybees builds its hive in a hollow tree. Honeybees cared for by today's beekeepers live in box-shaped wooden hives. And it says this is a wild honeybee hive, and this is a wooden beehive. Inside the beehive, the honeybees are building an amazing structure called a honeycomb. It is made up of countless 6-sided cells. Stored in many of these wax cells is the food that bees and people love to eat, honey. And these are labels, the cell, the honey, and down here in the corner, you see a bee on a honeycomb. 3 different kinds of honeybees live inside all beehives. There is one queen, about 100 male drones, and thousands of female worker bees. Like all insects, bees have 3 body parts. There is the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Honeybees have other parts too. We have more labels here. This is the worker bee, drone bee, queen bee. See if you notice any differences between the 3 bees. Okay, and here we have a diagram that's outlining the different parts of the bee. Like it shows us where the thorax is, the large wing and forewing. The stinger is used for protection. Only the females have stingers. Think about why that might be. This is the abdomen, small wing or hind wing. 2 big compound eyes are made up of many eye lenses joined together. The queen is the largest of the honeybees, and she can live the longest, from 3 to 5 years. All the other bees in the colony live for about 2 months, except over winter, when they live a few months longer. It is the queen's job to make sure the hive never runs out of bees. To do this, she leaves the hive to mate with her drones. Then she lays as many as 2,000 eggs a day. Wow. Drones are usually smaller than the queen. Their only job is to mate with her. So there's a drone bee and there's a queen bee. Most cells in the beehive are used for storing honey, but some are used for the queen to lay her eggs. These are called brood cells. In each brood cell, a bee will develop and grow. The largest brood cells are called queen brood cells, also called royal cells. Drone brood cells are smaller. Even smaller are the worker brood cells. The eggs in these cells will become worker bees. Although all worker bees are female, they do not lay eggs. Instead, they do the work of the beehive. Most eggs the queen lays are no bigger than the period at the end of the sentence. After 3 days, a larva hatches from each one. For the next 3 days, worker bees called nurse bees feed the larva bee milk. Then they feed it to the bee breed. A queen larva is fed royal jelly throughout its growth. Why do you think they call them nurse bees? And here it says worker bee called a nurse bee. Think about why she might be called a nurse bee. Bee milk is a milky syrup that is full of nutrition. It is made by glands inside the nurse worker bee. Bee bread is a combination of pollen and honey. Royal jelly is made the same way as bee milk, but is more nutritious. That's the queen larva. Each larva grows quickly, then spins a silky cocoon around itself. Inside the cocoon, a pupa develops. A nurse bee seals the cell with wax. Little by little, the pupa changes. It begins to look more like an adult insect. This process is called metamorphosis. Queens develop in about 16 days from the time the eggs are laid. The metamorphosis of drones and workers takes about 21 to 24 days. Finally, after the transformation is complete, an adult bee chews its way out of the brood cell, an adult honeybee. So this is showing metamorphosis, how it changes, and the adult honeybee. This honeybee is a worker bee. From the minute she comes out of her brood cell, she is as busy as a bee. For the next 3 weeks, she will have a number of different jobs to do inside the hive. First, she is a house bee, cleaning and polishing the cells. About 3 days later, she becomes a nurse bee. After 10 days of being a nurse bee, she becomes a wax-making bee. She makes flakes of wax in her abdomen and chews them to mold cells or repair old ones. Wax-making bees are also in charge of storing the nectar and pollen that other bees bring back to the hive. Other workers care for the queen. They are her court. They cluster around the queen to continually feed and groom her. About a week later, the wax-making bee becomes a guard bee and begins the outdoor life. Guard bees protect the hive. They chase away intruders with their stingers. They also alert the other bees by spreading a special scent when there is danger. A guard bee will sometimes die in battle to protect the hive and its honey. And that's a guard bee. The worker bee is now about 3 weeks old. She is ready to become a forager bee. Her last job, but a very important one. Forager bees are the bees you see zipping from flower to flower. They collect sweet juices called nectar from the flowers for honey making. It's the forager bee. So think about why the forager bee is one of the most important jobs a bee can have. At each flower, the forager bee collects nectar with her proboscis. She stores the nectar in a special part of her body called the crop or honey stomach. This stomach is separate from her other stomach. As she goes from flower to flower, she comes in contact with a yellow powder called pollen. Some of the pollen is collected in little baskets formed by the special hairs on her hind legs. As the forager bee collects nectar, she carries pollen from flower to flower. This is part of the process called pollination. When she has visited many flowers and her crop is full, she beelines back to her hive. This is showing pollination. It defines it for us. It says pollination is the movement of pollen from the stamen to the stigma of the same kind of plant. This makes seeds to grow new plants. This is the stigma, the stamen, and that's where you see the pollen. Back inside the hive, the forager bee brings up or regurgitates the nectar. Then she transfers it by tongue to a hive bee. The nectar is passed by tongue among the hive bees until some of its moisture is gone. Then a wax-making bee places the nectar in a honey cell. There it continues to dry. More and more nectar is added to the honey cell. Honey bees cluster over the cell and fan their wings to evaporate even more of the moisture in the nectar. As the nectar loses water, it becomes thicker and thicker. Finally, wax-making bees cap or seal the cell with wax. Slowly, the nectar ripens into honey. And it says honey is about 18% water. It says dances of the honeybees. When forager bees return to their hive, they have a special way of telling the other forager bees of important discoveries, like a new location of flowers full of nectar and pollen. They do the dances of the bees. The circle dance. The forager honeybee circles in one direction, turns around, and circles back the other way. This dance tells the other forager bees to look for new flowers anywhere within 300 feet of their hive. The Wagtail Dance. This dance tells the other forager honeybees that the flowers are farther than 300 feet away. The direction she dances while wagging her tail tells where the flowers are in relation to the sun. The number of wags per 15 seconds tells how far away the flowers are. A forager honeybee can visit up to 10,000 flowers a day. All the nectar she collects in her entire life can make only about 1 teaspoon of honey. And a teaspoon is really, really small, friends. To make 1 pound of honey, it takes nectar from over 1 million flowers. Also, different kinds of honey come from different kinds of flowers. Honeybees have always been valued for the honey they make. For thousands of years, people have stolen honey from wild beehives. People became beekeepers when they began to make their own hives. Some used hollow logs, others used clay pots. Later, in about 1500, European beekeepers started using upside-down basket hives called skeps. Then, in about 1850, the hanging movable frame beehive was invented. So this is the skep. This is the hanging movable frame beehive, clay pot hive, hollow log hive, and the wild hive. On top of the hill is a modern beehive. The beehive is stacked in sections. In each section hang about 10 wooden frames where the bees build their honeycombs. To help the bees build their honeycombs faster, the beekeeper places wax foundations in the frame. It says the honey super is the section the beekeepers will harvest. So that's where they get the honey from. The food chamber is where the bees store the honey they need for their food. This is the entrance and exit for the bees. This is how they get in and out. The brood chamber is where the queen lays her eggs. And it says a foundation is a sheet of wax impressed on both sides with a pattern of honeybee cells. It's time for the beekeepers to harvest the honey. The honeybees have had several months to build and fill the honeycombs. The colder the winter, the more food they will need. The beekeepers move slowly around the hive. They wear special clothes and use special equipment to protect themselves from getting stung. This is the helmet with veil to protect their face. White overalls with elastic or ties at the wrists and ankles. White makes bees feel calm. A metal hive tool is used for prying apart the frames stuck together. A smoker calms the bees. They wear boots, so there's no way that bees can get on their body to actually hurt them or harm them or sting them. And they wear gloves, so they're all protected. Back at home in a shed, the beekeepers use a hot knife to cut the wax caps of the honeycomb, off the honeycomb. Then the honeycomb frame is placed inside an extractor. It spins around at high speed to remove the honey without breaking the honeycomb. The honey goes into a collecting tank. So this is the extractor, she's scraping, and it goes into the collecting tank. Next, the honey is filtered through a screen and a cloth to remove small pieces of wax. Then the honey is packed in airtight jars. Sometimes beekeepers melt down old and damaged honeycombs to make beeswax candles and other things. The rest of the empty honeycomb frames are returned to the hive for the honeybees to fill again. For some beekeepers, honey making is a hobby. They use the honey themselves or give it away as gifts. Commercial beekeepers provide stores and shops with gleaming jars of their products to sell. Delicious sweet honey from the honey makers. Yum. Okay. And that's the end of our book. This is just kind of going through some journal entries of a beekeeper. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed The Honey Makers by Gail Gibbons and really learned a lot about the process that bees go through to make honey. I know that I did. What you are going to do next is you should have this worksheet. It is page 9 in your packet. And you are going to draw the life cycle of a bee. So draw the different stages that a bee goes through their life on this paper. And make sure, and if you would like to kind of add some words, like maybe you don't want to draw, it's okay if you don't want to draw, you can do words as well. And then take a picture and send it to your teacher. Have a great day.